Yesterday, you told reporters off the Senate
Congressmen
floor,
from both sides of the aisle.
Both Republicans and Democrats.
This was a bipartisan effort.
This is not a party issue.
Hello, welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Leigh Ann Caldwell, an anchor at Washington Post Live and also co-author of the Early 202 newsletter. Today, we have another edition of Across the Aisle, and we are joined by a Republican and a Democrat on a very timely conversation. The top two members of the House Intelligence Committee, Chairman Mike Turner of Ohio and Ranking Member Jim Himes of Connecticut. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
So we're talking because this week was a big week for the Intelligence Committee and in investigations generally speaking. Special Counsel John Durham, who was assigned an investigation to look into the origins really of the Mueller investigation of allegations of Russian collusion in the 2016 campaign. He testified behind closed doors before your committee on Tuesday. So we're going to start there with Chairman Turner. I want to ask you, it was behind closed doors. What did you learn from his testimony?
Well, it was very appreciated that Mr. Durham came before our committee, and our committee's been working on a very bipartisan basis. I want to thank Jim Himes for his dedication to that. Really, every member of our committee has been working across the aisle on a bipartisan basis. We asked John Durham to come to our committee to talk about his report, not just to give us the lay of the land of the text itself, the descriptions of the misconduct that had occurred, his dealing with the facts as to how he constructed what is the narrative of the Durham report. But how did he see that this would translate into changes or policy issues, or what would we take away as an assignment? Although he ends that report by saying, I'm not going to make any specific recommendations, he's certainly willing to do that. He just didn't feel that in that report itself that was the context. So we had a great exchange where we talked about FISA, we talked about the FBI, we talked about investigations, we talked about our role of our committee. And he was very helpful, I think, in giving us some really to-do list items that we'll be pursuing.
So I definitely just want to preface that we're going to get to FISA in a moment. I have a big section on FISA. So before we go there, because I know this is a big topic for you guys, Ranking Member Himes, this report took 4 years, millions of dollars. It was essentially, to remind our viewers, an investigation of the investigation into the Trump campaign in the 2016 election. It ended with just one conviction. Was this report worth the time and the money, do you think?
Well, it's as the chairman and I are charged with oversight, and that means that we are responsible for making sure that the instruments of the executive branch, whether that's the FBI or the Department of Justice or the CIA, don't act outside of the law or act inappropriately. So it's a funny question to an overseer, right? We want scrutiny on the actions of the FBI and the DOJ. And so, yes, it was fine. And look, my point of view is that truth is never a bad thing. And so long as you have good, objective and truth-oriented investigators doing this stuff, that's important. What you could argue is that the Durham report didn't uncover a lot of new ground with respect to the Inspector General's report, which was issued, in which the Inspector General and Durham both agreed in their reports that there was, meaningful misconduct on the part of the FBI, in particular with respect to affidavits filed for FISA surveillance. And again, though everything we do, and I agree with the chairman 100%, we do have this little kernel behind closed doors where we can resist some of the political pressures, but all of the noise and smoke and fire around these investigations is largely people putting immense amounts of political pressure on them because they're desperate for those investigations on both sides to prove out either their animus against Donald Trump or their animus against Hillary Clinton or whatever it may be. That's not to say that the pressures are symmetrical. I don't think they are. But to answer your question, look, if you're an overseer, you should welcome investigations. You should welcome the ability. Neither Mike nor I have the time or the resources to spend years looking at the nitty-gritty detail of what FBI does. So we welcome these things as good cooperative efforts in our oversight.
And it's important to note that this investigation has been highly politicized over the last several years. Donald Trump predicted that it was going to uncover crimes of this century. There's been a lot of anticipation that this would uncover corruption in the FBI, politicization in the FBI. So it's actually just monumental that the two of you, a Republican and a Democrat, are sitting here together to talk about what has been political investigation. So I want to thank you for that. But also, Chairman Turner, what John Durham did find is that the FBI should have perhaps not opened a full investigation into Donald Trump and his campaign, but perhaps a preliminary investigation. So was that an important telling of his findings? Was that important when you look at the overall picture of the FBI and how it handles these really sensitive, high-profile investigations?
Right. So what he found was what he called confirmation bias, that in fact the individuals that received information had a bias, a predisposition against Donald Trump. And that, of course, we all know because it was expressed in text messages, which were released and we've all had an opportunity to read. But his conclusion of this confirmation bias was that it allowed them then to use the mechanisms of the FBI to confirm the information they have in front of them and then launch a full investigation. What's really sad about all this is if you think that this should not have happened, we have both the Mueller report, the Horowitz report, the Durham report, the Nunes memorandum, all of them saying that there was not collusion, and yet we have this full-blown investigation. We have 2 years where the Trump administration was completely hounded, where they had a special counsel that was investigating them. Imagine for our country just the divisiveness that occurred if that had not happened, if it had just been as the report describes, a Clinton campaign slogan or initiative rather than a government initiative. And that's where we have to be concerned, not just that there's a campaign that has this initiative and opposition research, but that it was then taken into the government and then with that had the officialdom of government action. That leaves us at a position where we have to be concerned because we all got to see, our country was torn apart, the media was torn apart, and certainly we had an administration of a validly elected president who was hounded for 2 years over something that just wasn't true.
Ranking Member Himes, you also called confirmation bias this week. You said it was bad. How do you fix it?
Well, that's really our job, and it's very difficult. One of the lines that stuck with me from the Durham report was he didn't actually, in fact, he explicitly said that he's not proposing changes in policies and procedures. And his line was, what we need to do is not do new rules. We need to go back to really abiding by the old ones. And that's pretty challenging. And look, I think I would tell you that FBI, particularly driven by the fact that there's a great deal of suspicion around their activities in the FISA world, has cleaned up their act meaningfully. Now, I'm not going to say they've cleaned up their act enough because I'm not ready to say that, but they have instituted pretty dramatic reforms with respect to what an agent needs to do when they want to query a U.S. person, as they did in the case of Carter Page. Now, Carter Page, I should note, was not 702 querying, but the point is it's the same organization not acting with the competence and the clarity that it should. So, they've already made changes. The question, of course, is it enough? And what Mike and I are trying to do, I don't think Mike and I think that we're going to agree with each other on political stuff. Just yesterday, we voted in different ways around the censure of the previous chairman, Adam Schiff. So we're not seeking unanimity of opinion, but what we are trying to do is create a space where we can do the critical work of overseeing our national security that is not polluted by people's partisan desires. And, the chairman's absolutely right. The Trump conspiracy collusion, whatever you want to call it, that was the subject of 5 investigations. By the way, the charge that Hillary Clinton was incompetent as Secretary of State when the Benghazi tragedy went down was subject to 8 or 9 investigations, right? So, all all of those investigations failing to turn up the kind of political conclusions that partisans are so desperate to find. And though Mike and I are not charged with this task, we do need to think about how we take the temperature down, because at the end of the day, the cost is borne by the American judicial system. If 60% of Americans think that the FBI is either working for Hillary Clinton because of the Steele memorandum or working for Donald Trump because the director of the FBI announced Hillary Clinton's investigation, the effect of that is a total loss of confidence in our judicial process. And I'll tell you, that way lies the erosion of our democracy.
So, Chairman Turner, are we just in this everlasting investigations loop? I mean, there has been investigation after investigation since before the 2016 election. Does it, as members who do who are part of oversight, is this okay, or does there need to be some sort of systematic change here?
Well, certainly we can't go into a period where there are no investigations, that we don't have oversight. And I think Jim's absolutely correct. And that's our role, is to provide oversight. I think what we have to be concerned with, and we had this conversation with Durham, and that is this issue of, what is political discourse, what is government action, and then what is oversight. In many instances, we have to provide oversight of what was government action. Like, there was a person who was in a government role who took action X, and was that appropriate? Those types of questions, I think, are what everybody wants government to do. It's how we have the checks and balances. It's how we make certain that we find the truth and that people are held accountable. The concern is when we have a political discourse that is purely political, that is parts of campaigns that then are incorporated into government action. We have to be very concerned about that. And that's, I think, what, as Jim was saying, what Durham's message is, I think that the foundational rules, the principles that the FBI and DOJ had would have before found an aversion to this in that particular instance. And in others, I think, we have to look at make certain that government's doing the right thing when government takes action.
So, Chairman Turner, I'm going to follow up with you. Do you think that the FBI is inherently a political organization, or has been politicized in recent years?
I think that, and I think that's part of the sadness of what you hear from Durham's report, and when you speak to him personally, when he talks about this confirmation bias, I think he thinks that internal culture at the FBI, that at an earlier era, that you probably would have had people who were coworkers, who were sitting with each other, who might have put their arm on each other's shoulder and said, "Hey, now, let's step back here." And you didn't have that. You had people who were full bore ahead with that confirmation bias. I do think that the Durham report has lessons for the FBI that are not just administrative and are not just laws for Congress to pass, but are cultural. And I hope they rise to that occasion. We're going to be talking to Director Wray, obviously, after having talked to Durham, and say, okay, now we've heard from him. We've read this report. Clearly, there's issues of misconduct. There's issues of culture. How are you going to address this, and how are you going to change it? Which is, as you said, and as Jim correctly said, is completely separate than FISA and 702 renewal that is coming up. But I do think there's a cultural issue that needs to be addressed at the FBI, and that is a leadership issue. That goes directly to the director's responsibility.
Ranking Member Himes, do you agree?
Quickly add there, I think this is a really important distinction. I mean, when people ask, is the FBI a political actor? First of all, remember, we're talking about a massive organization with tens of thousands of employees scattered all over the world, right? So the question, is it political, is sort of an odd question to begin with. It's made up of human beings, and those human beings have political sentiments. And you could point, for example, to the really inadvisable text that Peter Strzok sent to Lisa Page, in which he made very clear that he did not like Donald Trump. Now, it's not a problem. All of us have our own opinions about Donald Trump and about Hillary Clinton. That's not a problem. What is a problem is when that becomes relevant in a political environment. And what I would say is, there's no question in my mind that everybody in the FBI has a political belief and political biases. What they need to do is keep those biases out of the work. And the good news around the Inspector General's report and the Durham report is that neither investigation found that there was systematic political bias. That's good. What worries me much more than that is there is a, for lack of a better word, I will say there is a culture of sloppiness around things like U.S. person queries. All you need to do is read the FISA opinions or read the PCLOB reports, and what you see is that when a special agent sits down, or used to, because I should note there have been dramatic reforms inside the FBI. Whether they're enough or not, that'll be for Mike and I to talk about in the future. But it is really clear that when a special agent sits down to do a query, they are not thinking as seriously. The culture does not require them to think as seriously about the fact that they are about to view U.S. person data. And for years that went on. And look, it's well documented. And that we're never going to squeeze political opinions out of the people who work in the FBI, but we can absolutely alter the culture and the procedures so that so that there's no sloppiness in the system. And around profound issues of privacy, they are as careful as a pilot flying a plane or a surgeon conducting surgery. And that has not been where they have historically. That's not historically been their mindset.
So, Congressman Himes, is that done through the FISA process, or is that done through just management at the top and a change in leadership? Can you kind of clarify there?
Yeah, both. And you should get the chairman's view on this, but absolutely both. I mean, there must be accountability. And there has for a lot of the senior leaders of the FBI who either, undertook bad behavior or tolerated it. There must be accountability because an example must absolutely be set. That's true in the FBI. That's true in corporate America. That's true here in the United States Congress. But more challengingly, there also must be structural and cultural change. So again, that FBI agent sitting in front of a terminal about to do a U.S. person query, they are as serious about their job. I said pilots and surgeons. It may not be a matter of life and death, but it's a matter of a constitutional right. And changing that culture is about more than accountability. It's procedures. And by the way, the chairman and I have spent a lot of time with the director of the FBI saying, you're going to have a hard time keeping these tools because of the behavior and how you use these tools. And guess what? That's caused them to sit up and take notice. And we're seeing changes inside the FBI that, hopefully will be sustainable.
One quick follow-up. Does Director Wray, should he still lead the organization?
I'll jump in really quickly here. The misbehavior inside the FBI, and I would not just the FISA application stuff, but when Director Comey, I alluded this before, when Director Comey, without consulting with the DOJ, a week before a national election, announced an investigation into Hillary Clinton, you sort of you want to set your hair on fire over that kind of behavior. I would note that that since Director Wray came into his position, reforms have been undertaken. The number of improper U.S. person queries has gone down dramatically. So I don't speak for the chairman on this, but I see Director Wray as a guy who's been working pretty hard to clean up the FBI's act.
Chairman, your answer.
And this, I would agree with Jim. One thing that I think is important is, a lot of, for example, when you take the Durham report, that misconduct occurred before Wray was there. And even though there are many elements of his leadership that I think many members are very concerned about, and in directions that the FBI has taken that need to be addressed, at this moment in time, I think he is informed with the problems that Congress sees in the performance of the FBI. I think he's discerningly aware of the fact that the FBI's reputation has been tarnished with the American public and why. And I think not only does Congress and the American public have Director Wray's attention, but I think that he sees these items as issues that are his responsibility and for reform. Now, if he is unable to dedicate himself to that, then obviously I think there needs to be a change. But I think we're seeing a change in Director Wray, and that's what's important, is that he clearly has seen there's a problem, it needs to be addressed, and I think he's getting a clear handle on what those issues are.
Now to FISA, Chairman Turner, I know this is especially a big issue for you. You've set up a bipartisan subcommittee working group to address this. This was brought up in part of the Durham report, but it's also a separate issue too. To remind our viewers, FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that was enacted after 9/11 in an attempt to get more surveillance of foreign nationals, but especially in Section 702, a portion of that act, sometimes Americans are swept up in this surveillance that raises some constitutional concerns. So this act needs to be reauthorized by the end of the year if it is to be reauthorized. So specifically, what changes need to be made? Have you figured that out yet?
Right. So you're correct. We've appointed a bipartisan working group. Jim and I have impaneled this with members from our Intelligence Committee. We have both, it's an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. It is truly a bipartisan working group. The Judiciary Committee, Chairman Jordan, has agreed to provide members of a working group for a week so we can have a coordinated effort between the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee. That's going to be incredibly important. In addition to both the Durham report and just what we've seen for the the FISA abuses that occurred in the Trump-Russia investigation, the FISA court itself has released publicly, so it's open in the public discourse, some areas of where there have been violations. Jim and I have also received presentations of what some of the reforms are that have been undertaken in the FBI themselves, and although they do seem to be having some impact, there certainly is a ways to go. There's a gap between the accountability portion of those reforms and the access to the overall data that I think we could have an impact on. But predominantly, as Jim is saying, this is an issue of data on American persons, where we have a statute that is designed to give us access to foreign intelligence. So we need to be very, very careful in this method to be able to protect people's constitutional rights, people's privacy. And I think that this working group is doing a very good job of identifying, here are the abuses. These are the things that we've seen that have happened. These are Americans that have been inappropriately queried through the system, one of which is Darren LaHood, Congressman LaHood, who's the chair of our working group. He is one of those who has been identified by the court in their own releases as having been inappropriately queried. So I think from those abuses, we're going to get a pretty good picture of some of the areas that we need to fix.
And Ranking Member Himes, where do you, first of all, you have suggested that any changes should be made. Are you confident that there can be some sort of agreement between a Republican House and a Democratic Senate on how to move forward, that this perhaps could be reauthorized by the end of the year?
Well, when you ask the question that way, it's a very easy question to answer. Mike and I every day, for much of the day, see the information that we get that keeps Americans safe as a result of 702 authorities. And that it helps us interdict fentanyl. It helps us understand what the Chinese are doing, what the North Koreans. So the answer to the question you asked is that 702 must be reauthorized. I mean, were we to just put that tool down and say we're not going to use it, you might as well, I don't want to be, bombastic here, but you might as well say, let's get rid of a couple of aircraft carriers, right? I mean, that would be profoundly foolish of the Congress to do. So it must be reauthorized. The only question is, what are the reforms that are necessary to get a majority in the House and 60 votes in the Senate for that to happen? I don't know that we know the answer to that question yet. I can tell you that the reforms live on a spectrum somewhere between what the FBI has already done, which has been really quite meaningful, is enough. I would tell you that some people are probably there. And then some people are very much in the camp of, the FBI shouldn't do U.S. person queries. Mike and I are starting the process now of, educating our respective members, broadly speaking, across the House of Representatives on the authorities, on the history here, on the reforms that have been made. So it'll be a little while before we know where you get a majority on that spectrum of proposed reforms.
Great. Chairman Turner, I want to switch topics quickly. Earlier this week, you said that the Trump classified documents case, that there's grave concern about it. Just real quick, have you guys seen the documents that Trump was in possession of?
We have not. Well, first off, we've not seen all of the documents, but what we've seen relates both to Trump and Biden and Pence. So these are not just Trump documents. And my statement, actually, what you heard was, I have concern over all of the documents that are serious that we've seen. There, you can put them into three categories. There's the ones that are meaningless. There's two that category 2 items that have by date have expired in their significance, and 3 that are like hot right now. In category 2 and 3, there are documents that should never have been removed from a classified controlled space. and that would pose a risk. And that's true for both Biden and for Trump. I think that our committee is taking the look of this as to, okay, we have a problem in the transition between administrations. We had the archives and both of the archivists that are responsible for presidential transitions testified that there has been a problem in the transitions of administrations and the commingling of classified and unclassified documents going all the way back to Reagan. And over 80 members of Congress have had classified documents that have been sent to, and government officials have been sent to libraries to be held, where those institutions have later got in touch with the archives and said, we found classified material, including almost 100 from Senator Muskie's collection.
Yeah.
So this is an area where I think, we do have concern. That is sort of our job, right? Our job is to be concerned about classified information and classified material. So when you see this, it's striking to us, and it certainly is concerning to us that these documents would be out of a controlled space.
Do you think that many Republicans are saying that this indictment against Trump shows that there's two-tiered system of justice? Do you agree, Chairman Turner?
I think certainly you have a huge perception that there is two-tiered of justice. You have the Hillary list, which we could all go over again, of the classified material that was actively going through her server at her home. You have these documents. You have the Biden documents. Biden's house wasn't raided. Trump's house was raided. So you have to see though, but what happens next, and that's the rest of the story, right? I mean, many people miss the president of the United States currently has a criminal investigation with a special counsel appointed concerning his handling of classified information. We'll all have to wait to see how that turns out.
Yeah, well, and to be clear, most of the charges relate to Trump's resistance of handing those documents over, which makes a difference between the Biden campaign.
I don't think you can do a comparative of most. I mean, the issue itself is obviously there have been charges that have been filed that relate to the handling of classified documents. And the issue goes to then what happens in the other investigation that's ongoing. And that's really what was your question. We'll have to watch both of these to see, how does that play into people's overall concern of, is there unequal application of the law?
Ranking Member Himes, I want to run through a bunch of appointments or investigations that have been run through the Department of Justice over the last several years. You have the Mueller investigation under the Trump Department of Justice, the Durham investigation under Trump, the Weiss-Hunter Biden that was launched under a Trump DOJ, the Biden classified docs, the Trump classified docs under the Biden Department of Justice. So with all these investigations that have been ongoing through the Department of Justice or directed by the Department of Justice, do you think that the DOJ is independent from the White House, or independent enough?
I do. I don't know. Independent enough is an interesting question. We've watched this president remain utterly silent on the work, on Special Counsel Smith's work. That was obviously not the behavior of the previous president, who regularly urged the Department of Justice and the FBI to investigate his political foes. But I mean, look, I think it needs to be said flat out. I don't see a problem with the investigations. I didn't agree with absolutely everything in the Durham investigation, but I can't point to anything in it that was clearly incorrect. And I think that we owe it to our democracy to say very clearly that there are not two tiers of justice, that the DOJ and the FBI are human beings and they will make mistakes. But, this notion that, the investigations of Donald Trump's behavior with respect to Russia were driven by political considerations, those points have now been refuted both by the Inspector General and by the Special Counsel Durham. And we 8 or 9 investigations of Benghazi, 2 investigations of Donald Trump. What we need to do is stop eroding the stability and the respect for the Department of Justice and the FBI, conscious as we are that they are imperfect, because their work doesn't lead to the political result that we want. My colleagues here are up in arms over the notion that Hunter Biden pled on this, and evidently people in this institution who aren't lawyers know far better than the prosecutors in that case and point to that as politicization. I made a statement, Leigh Ann, on social media saying that there was no comparison between what Donald Trump did or didn't do with respect to Russia and Hillary Clinton's behavior, which I termed irresponsible. I used the word irresponsible with respect to keeping official emails on her private server, and I got obliterated by Hillary Clinton supporters saying, how can you say it was irresponsible? And I tell that story just to say that this is the world we're in, where Mike and I, if we try to do our jobs, try to do oversight, try to support the institutions that are critical to this country's operations, and we say things that aren't consistent with what our more activist voters want, we get obliterated. And if that keeps up, let's not be surprised 5 years from now when we no longer have a democracy.
We are out of time, but Chairman Turner, I want to give you 15 seconds to say something or respond to that before we have to go.
I just want to say that I agree with Jim on most things, but I do think our democracy is going to be sound, and I know he's saying that as the risk and a warning, and I certainly believe that the warning is true, but I don't want to leave on the note of in 5 years that might happen. But I tell you what, there are people in this institution every day in Congress who go to work, who work on a bipartisan basis. It's not what makes it in the headlines. It is the work that gets done, and it's necessary work, and it's certainly, I think, important for our country.
Great. Thank you both so much for your time today. Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Himes of the House Intelligence Committee, really appreciate it.
Okay.